welcome all of you to the third of our seven speakers this fall. Talks are going to continue each Wednesday at 4 through October 28th. And then in November, we'll wrap up with our final discussion session, which is going to be about responsible philanthropy. Britt Lake, class of '03, who was with Global Giving and is now with Feedback Labs, is going to talk with us about how to give away your money. So be sure to tune in for that one. We always send out a reminder, of course, to all the talks on the morning of, so just check those out and RSVP when you can. So today we welcome Jed Lau, class of 1998, who was originally scheduled to be a 7th speaker at the West Coast Alumni Symposium in March. It was going to be held in his hometown of San Francisco. And after the symposium was canceled, Jed was good enough to agree to join our Zoom series and give his talk to us today. Jed, thanks so much for being here, and I give you the floor.
Thank you, Megan. So happy to be here. You know, one of the blessings during this time is opportunities like this to see so many people whom I haven't seen in so long. So really thrilled to be here with you all today. And I want to thank the foundation for inviting me. I'm here to share the perspective of a stay-at-home parent going through this pandemic. I'm a dad of 2 kids, 8 and 5, and I last left the workplace over 3 years ago. As Megan mentioned, I was going to speak about my experience as a stay-at-home dad at the Alumni Symposium back in March. Then COVID-19 hit and everyone sheltered in place, and almost overnight the implications of being a stay-at-home parent changed. So this is actually a completely different talk than the one I was going to give back in March, which was ages ago. I'm going to tell you how I became a stay-at-home dad, and I'm also going to describe how my role has changed during this pandemic. First, it's safe to say that parents right now around the world are just trying to keep it together, and I'm among them. I certainly don't have all the answers, don't have it all figured out, and you'll hear that. But my wife and I, we think of ourselves as nerds, and we've been able to take a pretty analytical approach to running our household. And we've employed a few tools and strategies that have worked for us, and I'll be sharing those with you. So I say that because, you know, whether or not you're a parent, whether or not you have a job right now, I hope you'll still find some elements in my story that are relevant to you. So let's start first with how I became a stay-at-home parent. 3 years ago, I was at an up-and-coming startup, and I found myself completely burnt out. Burnout was a pretty intense experience for me, very humbling in the sense that I found myself at a point where I could no longer continue at my job just through sheer force of will. And my wife and I had a number of conversations before I gave notice at work. We talked about what I wanted to do next, and the honest answer was that I wasn't sure. I knew that I wanted to spend more time with the family, more quality time. And I knew that going back to work wasn't going to give me the time and space to figure out whatever was going to come next. How much time and space was dependent on a few key factors, one of those being the financial sustainability of me leaving the workforce. So I'm going to pull back the curtain here a little bit and just tell you that on my wife's income alone, we're almost able to pay the bills, but we have a slow leak each year. It makes a little hissing sound, which requires us to dig into our savings. Not a terrifying amount, but a leak nonetheless. And we monitor this leak by revisiting our income and expenses spreadsheet annually and adjusting any numbers that might have changed over the past year. Another thing that we talk about periodically is the division of responsibilities within our house. We've always wanted to balance things as much as possible, even with me being a stay-at-home dad. And one exercise that we found valuable is to write down every responsibility that each parent has in the house. Every single thing, no matter how small, and we see how long each parent's list is. The most useful thing about these lists is that they leave no room for anything that is ambiguous or implied. If it's not written down, it doesn't count. And we update these lists each year to see where the division of labor falls at any given point in time and to see if anything needs to be rebalanced. They actually tell you to do this in family and parenting books. And so this is, again, a reminder that my wife, Elisa, and I are nerds, and we actually do these things, and it's been incredibly helpful for us. So that was the state of our household pre-pandemic. My wife working full-time, my kids in school full-time, and me at home full-time, but honestly with a lot of time on my hands to reinvest in myself post-burnout, exercising, volunteering, working on passion projects. With the pandemic, our household has been reconfigured dramatically. The biggest change, of course, is that the kids are no longer in school full-time. They are now at home on remote learning calls with their teachers about half of the day and with me the other half. Elisa works for a healthcare organization, and she's focused on the social health response to COVID-19. So as you can imagine, at the start of the pandemic, she was working what I called startup hours, up at 7, in bed at 2, every day, including weekends, for weeks. Her schedule's a lot better now, but we still don't see her for most of the day, even though she's working from home. And as for me, I've had to double down in my role as a stay-at-home dad so that Elisa can keep working, so that the kids can keep learning, and so that the household can keep running. My day has been fragmented into half-hour segments, interrupted every half hour. I'm going to get interrupted during the speech, when kids get on or off their remote learning calls. And I've had to squeeze my life into these half-hour blocks. The days have reminded me of when the kids were newborns and my time was similarly fragmented. A seemingly endless cycle of feeding, burping, diaper changing, and napping, and repeating. There is nowhere in the house to go where I cannot hear somebody else's call. I can hear somebody else's call right now. And I've moved my desk into our hallway closet under the stairway, Harry Potter style, which is where I am right now. I'm in my closet. And even here, I can hear other people's calls. We were talking about the wildfires earlier, and there are moments when I feel like I'm suffocating, not just from the wildfires, but also just from everything that's happening here at the house. So all of this is hard. My original mission to spend quality time with the family is no longer being fulfilled. Quality time has been replaced by a daily grind. And the daily grind has prevented me from doing the things that have given me a sense of purpose and fulfillment. I've struggled to figure out how to sustain myself when I'm so focused on sustaining others right now. And when I felt overwhelmed, I have at times responded in the worst possible way, throwing tantrums, raging at my kids for the most benign things. These kids who have been so resilient in the midst of all of this now also have to deal with the monster that I at times have become. And it's been these incidents where I've done emotional damage to my kids and to myself that have made me realize that it's not enough to just do the work. Unlike the burnout I experienced at my last job, this is a job that I can't walk away from. I have to be successful at this job. as a husband, and as a father. So the engineering nerd in me kicked in, and I created a tool for myself to manage my emotions. This is a variation of the Eisenhower Matrix, which is described in a number of personal productivity and time management books. The Eisenhower Matrix basically helps you focus on the things that are important and urgent. With my matrix, I take anything that's in my head that feels like it'll suck up emotional energy, and I put them in this matrix, categorizing them along one of two dimensions. Is it important? And is it within my control? Anything that's not important, I try not to stress about. Anything that's not within my control, I try not to stress about. That means the only things I try to stay focused on emotionally are the important things that are within my control. Psychologists call this compartmentalization. By writing down my emotional baggage and categorizing them, I can decide what actually weighs me down and what doesn't. The top item, as you may have seen in my important and within my control box, is do no harm. I got this from a fellow Morehead-Cain, Dr. Reagan McDonald Mosley. When I'm about to lose it, I can't use my family as lightning rods. I need to find a different, healthier way to vent. I must do no harm. And as it turns out, do no harm, we're finding, also applies to what's happening outside our house right now. There's a lot going on right now besides the pandemic. Black Lives Matter and racism, climate change, the election, the economy. Elisa and I are not hiding the ugly truths about the world from our kids. This is not the movie Life is Beautiful, where we're turning tragedy into a game. I think our challenge as parents is to make our kids realize that there are tragedies unfolding around us, but that they are safe and that they can do something about these tragedies as responsible and involved citizens. When I was going to speak in March at the Alumni Symposium, I was going to compare my experience as a stay-at-home dad to my solo backpacking trip on Catalina Island, my first solo backpacking experience since Outward Bound, the summer before I started at Carolina as a Morehead Scholar. I'd like to tell you about a different backpacking trip now. So this is the trip I took with my kids in July, mid-pandemic, to Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Park. This was their first backpacking trip. They loved it. We immersed ourselves in nature, and for the first time in months, we were able to stop thinking about the pandemic. And as I listened to my kids sleeping in the tent under giant sequoias that were thousands of years old, I realized the answer to my earlier question: how do I sustain myself right now? And the answer was this: more moments like this, sleeping in a tent under giant sequoia trees. And it is possible to create incredible memories during a pandemic. That's what I learned. And I knew that part of the equation was that to get more of these moments, I had to make them happen myself. They weren't going to happen on their own. Another part of the equation would come to me just 2 weeks ago, when a friend forwarded me an Atlantic article about a lawyer who left his Supreme Court clerkship to become a stay-at-home dad. His boss, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And in his article, he quotes Justice Ginsburg saying in an interview, "You can't have it all at once. Over my lifespan, I think I've had it all, but in given periods of time, things were rough. And if you have a caring life partner, you help the other person when that person needs it. I aspire to have it all as well. There's a lot I still want to do. And I think I'm preaching to the choir here. We're Morehead-Cain scholars. We're supposed to be changing the world. We're supposed to lead an extraordinary life, as the Morehead-Cain marketing materials used to say. But maybe this is what I'm learning through this experience, that we still can change the world, but when the time is right for each of us, that we can have it all, just maybe not all at once. And that even though the day-to-day may be a grind, maybe there is something worthwhile in the grind, maybe something extraordinary. Thank you.
Awesome, Jed. Thank you. We'd love to hear any questions. I see some claps out there. Sean, is that a raised hand? Do you have a question? Was that a clap? That was a clap. Okay, great. Seeing some claps that I'm wondering if they're raised hands.
Oh, I have a question. Thank you, Jed, for that. That was very enlightening. And I feel like there's a certain courage in what you've done. And I suspect other people think that. I think my question is, have you found, I'm in London, but I found a lot of my friends who have young children in London have been sort of initially delighted to spend time with them. And then they move into a sort of exhaustion period where they had no idea how hard it is to teach their children and to be with them 24/7, because they're just not used to it. And most of them, if they live in London, are both working. What have your experiences been of your friends who have both partners who work, and have their perspectives changed because of the COVID period?
That is a great question. We check in with our friends all the time. And I honestly don't know how other families are keeping it together. I mean, there may be others on this call who might be able to speak more to that than I, but I think, you know, the phrase that I've heard is surviving but not thriving. Both parents trying to work and trying to take care of the kids. You know, it ends up being a zero-sum game, and somebody is losing work time. And that's what the early research seems to be showing. You know, there have been a couple of studies where, you know, both moms and dads have been interviewed about who's doing the work around the house now that the kids are home, remote learning, you know, who's keeping them happy and well fed. And there's actually this hilarious statistic. I think it was something like 45 or 50% of dads said that they were taking care of the kids, and only 3% of their spouses agreed. So, you know, it's worth a conversation between, you know, the two parents to make sure that the reality is playing out the way everybody thinks it is.
Just, I mean, because it's not my world, because I don't have kids, I feel like a lot of parents want to spend more time with their kids. You know, our working world is very demanding, and yet they've been given an opportunity to do so. In London, we are literally in lockdown, and people are on furlough and not even working and being paid by the government. And yet, you know, having been presented with this opportunity, you know, it's been much harder than they expected. And you're someone who took that opportunity without it being forced upon them. What was their reaction to you pre-COVID when you made this choice? Did you have, you know, people secretly going, oh, I wish I could do that, but we can't afford it? Or, you know, what were people's reactions in your friendship group?
Oh yeah, I was like the horse whisperer in my friendship group. People would come up to me and say, how did you do that? What's the secret? And you know, there were lots of questions from coworkers at work, other dads who were concerned about themselves burning out at this startup. Within my group of friends, there were questions, but you know, I'll also say, in the spirit of transparency, that it takes practice, and this is actually my third time walking away from work for a period of longer than 6 months. And the first couple times, I found myself living in almost a state of denial, because I knew that I was going to go back to work at some point. It wasn't ever a question. This time I fully committed. And I think emotionally, there was this huge weight lifted off my shoulders when I finally updated my LinkedIn profile and put it out there for everybody to see. That's when I was no longer hiding anything. And, you know, I was speaking more openly about it. So I think it's one of those things that at least dads don't talk too much about. And it's not until they see somebody leave the workforce and become a stay-at-home dad that it prompts questions. But until then, you know, everybody seems to keep it all pent up.
I have a question, Jed. You talked about the world we live in and making a difference, but not all the time, or not now, maybe. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, so there I'm speaking about my personal aspirations. You know, I've taken enough, I've been at home long enough now at this point to have seen my kids grow and become more independent, and frankly need me less, which opens up time, or pre-pandemic did open up time and space for me to work on those passion projects that I alluded to. Some of that is volunteering, some of that is, you know, like a personal aspiration to do my own startup at some point and change the world. Those are on hold right now because there are more immediate things that I am taking care of in the house right now. So, you know, I am immediately focused on what's happening within my walls right now. And then at some point, once we start emerging from this pandemic and the doors start opening once again, then I might extend my reach to the outside world a little more.
Okay, thank you. I ask because you putting up the Ruth Bader Ginsburg allowed us all to admit that it's okay to not be okay, as somebody said. And yet we all want to help our communities. And so I hope these Morehead-Cain gatherings help giving us ideas in a small way. It's easy to criticize, to complain, but it's hard to do. So thank you for incorporating that into the stay-at-home dad comment, which surprised me. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question from a current scholar in the class of 2022, Caroline.
Hi, thank you so much. I also just wanted to say I loved your diagram about control versus not control. We're actually doing a scholar-led conversation tonight about like control and uncertainty. So I took a screenshot of that and we'll be sharing it with everyone. But my question actually goes to something that I've been talking to a lot of current scholars about right now, which is like this like weird dichotomy of like talking to a lot of older people who are like, you know, I like really grinded and like really like missed out on like a lot of things because I put it all into work, and like now I've taken a pause and it's great, and like I wish looking back I would have taken a pause then. And I think it's like really inspiring to like hear people say that, but then it's also like with the follow-up question of like, but you also wouldn't be saying that if you didn't put in the work first. And like you wouldn't even like really like have the position to say that if like to like have that foresight. And I guess it's hard from an undergraduate perspective. I'm a junior, so I'm like in that weird time where it feels like these are the really important decisions we're making. And like it's hard to balance that of like, is it too early to have that perspective now? Like, do you need to wait until it's like a burnout period and like life opens up? And I don't know. Yeah, I think that like that's something I've been talking with a lot of people, is that it's so refreshing, I think, to hear a lot of alumni specifically in the Morehead community, because I think like, as you said, like you killed it with the marketing materials, like that just like really hit home. But I think that it's like, it's hard to hold that with like, yes, like be this type of person who has these values, but also like you can probably make a change in the world, and like let's work hard for that too. And I guess like looking back on your undergraduate self, like what would you advise for that balance to be?
Well, I'm an older person now, so I struggle to remember my undergraduate self. But Caroline, the way I would answer your question is, first of all, you know, I recognize that not everybody can do what I'm doing, or, you know, other stay-at-home parents are doing. Like there are realities that have to be contended with, financial realities, care realities, time realities. But I think one of the things that I wish I had thought about as an undergraduate is the idea that one's trajectory through life is not linear. It's not always onwards and upwards, climbing a corporate ladder or onto bigger and better, or even just the idea that there is this notion of better or worse. Like even that is being somewhat judgmental about the path. There's only the path that makes sense to you. And that can take you in very surprising different ways. And I suppose my undergraduate self could have spent a little more time being open to all of those opportunities. And, you know, the space of options, as opposed to always, you know, believing that I was on this upwards trajectory through whatever career path I would then choose.
That I really like that framing. Also, Megan, I might be over speaking here, but I don't know, there's like a lot of really cool alumni on this panel, like conversation right now. I'm like looking at everyone's faces. I don't know, like if this is something like, I would love if that could be more of the conversation. Like I've just loved your talk and like your ability to like look at it from like that way, and not like this whole like from X to Y, Z, and then like once I'm at Z, I'll give you all my secrets and like tell you how to get here and everything I would have done differently, but like more of looking at it in this like circular way. And I don't know if that's like a conversation like of how we can more foster that in this community, but I just think it'd be really cool if like we're talking about those things, like especially given this time period, and didn't have to wait for 20, 30 years to like have that type of conversation. And so thank you for having it now. And I think that like if there's a way that we can continue that in this space, and I think these Wednesdays are like really doing it, but I don't know if anyone like else has any like thoughts on that as well.
Can I say something, Megan? I was just, hi Jed. Caroline, I was just gonna say to your question, I think if you have a trajectory in mind, I think one of the things that you should do is listen to what it is that you feel like you what is right for you. And sometimes that means taking time, and sometimes it doesn't. I took some time between undergrad and graduate school, and it was a great choice for me. But I think the biggest thing that comes out of all of that, going back to your original question of, you know, I worked really, really hard, and then I got to the point where I was like, okay, now I'm gonna sort of take some time to relax. You kind of have to put some work in before you can relax. And that might be an unpopular opinion, but I do think that there does come some benefit to working hard when you're younger and you have the energy to do it. However, I think the perspective that is helpful from those of us that are older is that not every decision and not every failure or lack of success or not reaching the point you thought you were going to reach is as important as it feels in that moment. And I think that is what I wish I had known, is that every grade or every misstep or every choice that I made was not necessarily going to be as big of a deal as it felt in that moment. And that it all sort of works out in the end. So that's all I'll add.
It is interesting. I think Emily and I, who are putting together the mentoring matches, are amazed at how many scholars list as something they want to talk about with alumni as being work-life balance, you know, which is so interesting, coming already as an undergrad, sort of recognizing that. So it's encouraging to us that that's on their minds.
Jed, I was just curious whether you have a group of confidants that when you need to talk to somebody outside of your family, your wife, who do you go to? And are you all giving each other the support that you found helpful?
I do have a group of confidants. I'm going to answer your question very honestly here, Chuck. We are mostly drinking a lot these days to wash away our sorrows. But, you know, they do act on occasion as effective sounding boards for whatever we're each going through in our particular lives at that point. One of them actually went to Carolina and graduated a few years earlier than I did. But to be honest, I wish I had more. I wish I had more confidants around me that I could go to for various things. Because the thing about confidants is that you know, these friends are each good in their own ways, but they don't all have maybe the experiences or the skill set that I need when I need to talk with them about a particular issue. And so always good to have more confidants,
I think for particularly the younger scholars, trying to develop that concept, you know, early on, so that as you go through life's changes and phases, you have somebody to come back to and check in with you. David Gardner, and also an alum, phrases that your personal board of directors that you have to report into and have to hold, they help hold you accountable as you make good and bad decisions.
Jed, Sandy Shaw from the class of 1966 has a question for you.
Hi, Jed. I'd also like to thank you for your open courage to share your burnout experience. Personally, I went to part-time 50% work from home in my early 60s, which lasted for about 5 years, and then I retired fully from similar burnout kind of situations. I don't really have a question, but I do have something I'd like to share on the subject of stay-at-home dads. I've recently read 2 excellent books on education and social democracy in the Nordic countries. And one of the things that really struck me was, because they believed, and follow-up studies have confirmed it, they finance serious parental leave, fatherly leave. And what they believe and what they've learned is that it makes for much deeper relationships between fathers and children, and much better fathering. And to Megan's point, work-life balance was prominent in both those books.
Thanks, Sandy. Yeah, I've been following the paid parental leave conversation pretty closely, and I do think that policy change is a necessary precursor to cultural change to make, something like what I'm doing more socially acceptable. And actually, your comment reminded me of a question that Caroline asked in passing, which is, do you have to wait until you're burned out before you make these changes in your life? And the answer is absolutely not. Burnout is something that should be avoided at all costs. You never want that experience. It means that you're acting too late. Whatever changes needed to be made should have been made months or years earlier, before you got to that point of burnout, that point of no return. So that would be a belated answer to your earlier question, Caroline. Thanks for reminding me, Sandy.
Jed, another scholar question from a scholar in the class of 2024, Emily.
I'll make this quick because I know the background is really loud. But I just want to thank you for everything you said. Caroline and I have been having a lot of these conversations. And so I think it's just super interesting to hear how, talking to older scholars and what, where they've come from and like the path that they've followed, like looking back and being like, I would prioritize people more. I would prioritize, conversation and experience, and not sticking to the more like tangible outcomes that people now make as benchmarks to be successful. So that is, I think, a really great point, and I just want to thank you for that, because sometimes it's hard to be the one to be like, okay, I'm going to break the mold and like prioritize people, and so I think it's a good reminder to hear that from someone who has your perspective. But in terms of the question, I am a daughter of a stay-at-home dad at the moment. He has yet to update his LinkedIn profile, so I'm going to make him get on that. But I didn't know if you had any tips on how to make it easier for him in this moment that we're having.
Make updating his LinkedIn profile easier, or being a stay-at-home dad easier?
Being a stay-at-home dad.
Oh, okay. Wow, nobody has ever asked me that question. Great question. And it's actually awesome that you're thinking about that. I would say ask him. I think we're trying to open up the lines of communication in all directions right now. We almost have to, because we are in such close quarters now. So we actually ask our kids for feedback on how we're doing as parents, which, is not a conversation I ever had with my parents, period, and still have not to this day. But getting a sense of what our parenting is like from their point of view is actually really valuable for us as we navigate these weird times, and we're having to adjust our parenting styles on the fly. And so that would be, my answer to you, Emily, is ask your dad how you could be
Thank you.
helpful.
Jed, I have a question coming from, I guess on this call has a little bit of type A personality in them. And, when you're type A in an office setting, it's generally rewarded. But when you're type A with a 3-year-old, not so good. So what was it like, changing gears and sort of putting that behind you and adjusting to that?
Yeah, it was a lot of learning to be present in the moment instead of thinking about what was next, the next meeting, the next activity. With a 2-year-old, which is how old Maya was when I left the workforce, everything just sort of became distilled down into this moment right now. And I learned to be more present with her. And I think that allowed me to engage more fully with her, even though, I then, and maybe even now, would not have called it a high quality or high bandwidth activity, playing with her toys or just having her, sitting on me while singing songs. But like, those are the moments that matter to a 2-year-old. And I'm about to take my words back, to a parent, right? Those are the moments that we remember. I think I still have this up on my LinkedIn profile. One of my favorite sayings when the kids were young, when they were newborns, is the days are long, the years are short. And what that means is the day feels like this endless, stretch of time when we're just doing the most mundane things, not necessarily the things that we would want to do as adults. But then in a blink of an eye, those opportunities are gone because the kids are older and they have a different social setting. They're interacting more with their friends than with, their parents. And I've really tried to remind myself of that, even now as they get older. These are really precious times, and it requires a shifting of gears, especially coming from the workforce.
Jed, I don't know how to thank you. What an incredible opportunity to spend some quality time with our Morehead-Cain community here and be inspired by you. And we can't thank you enough for your vulnerability and your courage and your wisdom and all that you shared with us this afternoon. I know it's leaving us with a lot of food for thought. I was just typing up that, yes, Caroline, we will collect the quotes in the Zoom chat and we'll try to keep this kind of conversation going. What an incredible opportunity. Thanks so much, Jed.
Thank you for having me.